the next thing, talk. So we started a new theme last week. Vidanya kicked us off with a new theme called Light in the Darkness. That's right, isn't it? Yeah, good. Light in the Darkness. And we're looking at the kind of the story and sort of drama of the Buddha's enlightenment. So we're going right back to where it all began with the Buddha, this new light entering into the world with the Buddha's enlightenment. And everything we learn about the Buddha, his life, and particularly his enlightenment, it all gives us clues and hints as to the nature of reality, actually, because enlightenment, it's not just some kind of, sort of special experience that some people might be lucky enough to get to. It's the fullness of realizing the true nature of existence and of human life. So anything we kind of learn about the Buddha's life and his enlightenment, it teaches us kind of in the deepest way, perhaps, the significance of what this life is really for, whether you're Buddhist or not, I would say. So we're looking at the story of the Buddha's enlightenment and what happened. And last week, we heard about his life leading right up to his attainment of enlightenment, how he battled with these kind of forces within his own mind that we called Mara. And we got to the end of that. And if this was like a film, a movie, sort of, set out on this quest, and finally he reached it, big climax, happy ending credits. But this talk is called, Does It Stop There? And the answer is no. No. It does not stop there. Enlightenment doesn't end with enlightenment. This is of the great significance. There are no ending credits at this point, or ever, we should hope. The light of his experience didn't stop there. It's been rippling through time and space ever since. Luckily for us, it's why we're all here today. So yes, it didn't just stop with him. He taught, he found a way to communicate and spread that light to others. So how did this happen? That's what this talk is can mainly be about. How did that happen? Before we get to that, though, something else happened. Well, quite a lot happened before he set off to teach. So after his enlightenment, after that kind of this night, he's sort of sitting and meditating throughout the night, going through these various stages of realization. We're told that he kind of sat on for about 7 weeks. So he just stayed in this kind of place for 7 weeks, digesting and assimilating what had happened. Sangha speaks about this as if like he was in a kind of going towards this precipice or this great waterfall, and then all of him went over to the other side. It was like this complete everything pouring into the enlightenment transformation experience. And so he spent 7 weeks kind of assimilating that and that kind of transforming him, we might say. And in the tradition, each week kind of different things happen. In the first week, it's told the first 7 days, he sat just experiencing the bliss of liberation, the bliss of complete freedom, the most profound peace and joy, even relief. He's experienced the way things are reality, and it is blissful. The Zen tradition sometimes speaks of people who kind of reach this like some kind of big realization. Their response is to burst out laughing. It's just this huge kind of like, it's hilarious, sort of like amazing, like such a huge relief, as if, there's this huge kind of weight, this huge anxiety, like they've been there, like all, like the whole life. And then you realize finally, there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be worried about. And there never was. And isn't that hilarious? How silly I was, how silly we all are. He just sits enjoying the bliss of liberation. And which I find interesting, because I wanted to mention this particularly because we're going to be talking more about kind of a compassion in the altruistic dimension. But I think it's really important to sort of recognize where that comes from, where that energy comes from, that kind of altruistic, selfless desire to help others. True selflessness and bliss go hand in hand. Yeah, this is no puritanical ideal, the Buddhist ideal. If there isn't bliss and joy somewhere down the line, it's not, well, yeah, ... Often we can think it's the other way around. We can think, just to sit and just enjoy ourselves and be happy is like, that's selfish, that's self-indulgent. Whereas actually, it's as if it's the other way around, So true, selflessness is a blissful experience, and it has a life of its own and a logic of its own. It can't be used for utilitarian purposes. It expresses itself, as we'll see later, expresses itself in a kind of beautiful reaching outwards. I used to feel quite strongly at times, overwhelmed by kind of senses of guilt. Like, who am I? Particularly meditating, almost have this sense of I'll be there meditating, and it was as if the world would just turn around and point its finger at me and say, what are you doing? There's so much suffering, so much out there that's wrong, that needs to be fixed, and you're just sat here meditating. What are you doing? It's really painful at times, actually, quite confusing. I think what I've come to realize is actually that insecurity was more based on a sort of I felt like a kind of clinging onto an idea of what a good person is, a good person. And really being afraid of rejected by others, by society, if I kind of turn away from that. Sitting and experiencing bliss is it's a bit different to the Protestant work ethic, to put it one way, I suppose. After this week of just experiencing the bliss of liberation, it might be more than after the first week, but one of the weeks, it said he spends a whole 7 days just looking at the tree that he sat under, the Bodhi tree, that sheltered him as he was attaining enlightenment. He just stands there even looking at it, feeling gratitude for the tree, which is quite amazing. There's a whole talk about this that Sangha actually gives, and the significance of gratitude. But that was part of it as well, gratitude, even for a tree, because it helped him to get to where he was. He's discovered the most precious and wonderful thing there could ever be. And his response also is of profound gratitude. So throughout the talk, let's not forget that sort of the wellspring of the Buddha's energy and activity, it all kind of comes from this place that is kind of completely free, open, blissful, peaceful. And I know for myself, when I encounter people who have something of that dimension in them, it's like this sense of, they're not as concerned about things as most people. They seem really happy. It really affects me. It really touches me. It's kind of like a sense of actually, it's okay. It's okay. Life's okay. They're proving it because they're okay. So we get to the end of the 7 weeks. I won't go through the whole process there, and then the Buddha starts to turn his mind towards the possibility of teaching, of kind of passing on what he has discovered to others. And I'm reading from this book, a little bit from this. It's called The Life of the Buddha, according to the Pali Canon. So this is like the traditional Buddhist scriptures that have been arrayed in order to make a kind of life story of the Buddha. So if you're interested in going right back to the source of these stories, this is a really great book. It's in the library. So it says, "Now while the Blessed One was alone in retreat, this thought arose in him. This Dharma that I have attained to is profound and hard to see, hard to discover. It is the most peaceful and superior goal of all, not attainable by mere ratiocination." Rationality, I'm guessing that means. "Subtle for the wise to experience. But this generation relies on attachment, relishes attachment, delights in attachment. It is hard for such a generation to see this truth. And if I taught the Dharma, others would not understand me, and that would be weary and troublesome for me. Enough of teaching the Dharma that even I found hard to reach, for it will never be perceived by those that live in lust and hate. People died in lust, and whom a cloud of darkness laps will never see. What goes against the stream is subtle, deep and hard to see, abstruse. considering thus his mind favoured inaction and not teaching the Dharma. Cliffhanger. So what's going on here? What's going on here? We're going to unpack this a little bit. Well, firstly, one aspect I think we might say is going here is he realizes, he knows that he can't tell people the nature of reality. It cannot be put into words. It is literally impossible. It's just not an option. There he is, he's realized the most subtle, abstruse, profound truth. And then he's realizing at the same time, there's no way I could tell this to anybody. It's impossible. There are no words for it. It's beyond words. Yeah, beyond rationality, like all rational words, thinking. It's not irrational, but it's beyond rationality. Could it even be possible to help others realize this? This is the kind of question he's asking. And as well as it being beyond words and concepts, he's also having this reflection of looking at the world and seeing, all of us, we're so enmeshed in attachment and hatred. It's like it's kind of in our makeup, it's like this sort of, by attachment, I suppose, like what do I mean by that? You could, it's like we function by kind of grasping hold of things, clinging onto things, of kind of making things mine, building up a kind of ego identity, status, trying to fix things, trying to keep things the same. Sort of, this is our whole way of being, we might say, and then sort of being repulsed and hateful, or like pushing away anything that gets in the way. And you're seeing that this is the way human beings function, and it's incredibly significant that is what gets in the way. Yeah, it's not. It's the quality of our heart, might say. Craving and attachment, craving and hatred being kind of embedded within the human heart. That's what gets in the way. It's not that we're not intelligent enough, or that we're like, just need to be like told a really good lesson or something, or we're just stupid. It's like, it's like the quality of the kind of ethical quality of our being is what prevents us from really seeing the truth. So we're told he doubted his ability to help the world by teaching the Dharma. But then something else happens. Here we go. So in comes a new character called Brahma Sahampati. And he's a kind of like god-like being. He's not God. In kind of Indian mythology, you have all kinds of different god-like beings who live a really long life and then become something else at the end of it. So it's not a kind of like eternal God, but he's like a kind of mythical god, angelic type being, and he's sort of seen as almost like the pinnacle of that. So when he speaks, it's like the universe speaking. There's that cosmic dimension. And it says, then it occurred to Brahma Sahampati, who became aware in his mind of the thought in the Blessed One's mind. The world will be lost. The world will be utterly lost. For the mind of the Perfect One, accomplished and fully enlightened, favors inaction and not teaching the Dharma. And then he teleports to the Buddha, or apparates super fast, instantly. Ping, there he is. And then he talks to the Buddha and he says, Lord, let the Blessed One teach the Dharma. Let the Sublime One teach the Dharma. There are beings with little dust on their eyes who are wasting through not hearing the Dharma. Some of them will gain final knowledge. And then he kind of gives them some more verses and kind of like entreating the Buddha to teach. Yes, there are those that can hear. And then the Blessed One listened to Brahma Sahampati's pleading. Out of compassion for beings, he surveyed the world with the eye of a Buddha. He surveys the world with the eye of the Buddha, and we're told that he sees the world as like a great lotus pond, a great pond filled with lotuses, each lotus being one of us, one of the people, beings, each being a lotus in different stages of growth and development, some kind of immersed down in the water, closed bud, some reaching up a bit higher, some kind of fully out, nearly ready to open and out upwards towards the light. And he reflects on all the different qualities and faculties, that some are sort of keen, some are a bit sort of less keen, some have got, what are the words he uses? Yeah, some with much dust in their eyes, some with little dust in their eyes. Hard to teach, easy to teach. So all kinds of different qualities of beings. He sees this like it's this image of lotuses in different stages of growth. And seeing that there are some lotuses that are actually, they're close, they're up, they're ready, they're receptive, they're ready to grow that bit further. He says, wide open are the portals of the deathless. Let those who hear show faith. So yes, he proclaims, it is time. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go teach. There's so much in that kind of passage. And so I'll be drawing out some of it. Firstly, I want to talk about this language of little dust in their eyes, which I think is really, it's interesting, isn't it? It's an interesting image, dust in your eyes. Dust is like this kind of dead sort of, it's organic, I was going to say inorganic, but it has that kind of feel to it. Think of like the dusty road or like dusty desert or the dusty household. It has this feeling of like stagnation and kind of lack of energy. There's no water. So we've got dust in our eyes to different degrees. And this is kind of image as if, some of us, or to different degrees, we see things clearly or not. We see reality clearly or not to different amounts. And if you remember that we have this story in the follow-on course, I believe, of the magic mirror. If you remember, there's this like evil sorcerer who's made this mirror where whenever you look through the mirror, you see everything in its like kind of, everything that's negative or ugly that's in the mirror gets made huge. So if you look at your friend through the mirror, you just see everything that's like wrong with them and nothing else. It's this like really distorted view of kind of like hatred. That's how hatred sees the world, really. It focuses on what's wrong and thinks that's all there is. And in that story, the mirror shatters and then all this dust rains down and gets lodged in people's eyes so that they see things in this way. They don't see just how beautiful and incredible and amazing life could be. It is. We see the things we don't want and then we hate and we get into wars and arguments. And that's what the world is like. That's what we're all like. We have dust in our eyes. But some, says the Buddha, or says Brahma Sahampati, have little dust in their eyes. But most significantly, what I want to talk about is just this vision of life being, or all beings being like lotuses in different stages of growth and development. So the Buddha realizes that although he can't express his vision in words, he can't just tell people his experience, but what he can do is help people grow to the point where they can realize it for themselves. So this is really significant. So the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, they're said all to be skillful means. Yeah, skillful means. This is kind of interesting phrase, which means that they're all means to an end. All the teachings are there to help us to realize something for ourselves. They're not there to be clung to. They're not there to they're not the truth. The words of the Buddha, the Dharma, it's not literally the truth. It's there to point us towards the truth, for us to realize for ourselves, to something that is universal and that is part of human existence. Vidanya talked about this really beautifully a few weeks ago in his talk about ordination, the highest ideals in life. They're universal. They're not particular to different religions or traditions, but all traditions have their different ways to kind of access it. The Buddha Dharma being one of them. So it's pointing us towards something. Buddhism is pointing towards something beyond Buddhism, you might say, to the heart of life and what it means to be human. But significantly, he sees this vision of beings being lotuses growing. He sees it with his Buddha eye. If you notice that detail, he looks with his Buddha eye. So it's not just it's not with his actual eye. It's not with even his like kind of human imagination. He's looking with his kind of Buddha vision, you might say. I just had the Chuckle Vision theme tune come in my mind. Do you remember that? Buddha vision. But so it's more than just metaphor and intuition. When he's looking with his Buddha eye, with his Buddha vision, it's a vision of the nature of reality. So not just a kind of a nice idea. So this vision of all beings being lotuses, it's a vision of what he's seeing kind of from the enlightened perspective, seeing the truth of life and what it's for and what we're all actually doing and what we're trying to do. We're all lotuses trying to grow. That's like the human condition, you might say. That's life. In the intro course, we have this one of these big ideas, which we sometimes call operational concepts, which is that we can change. But we also say it's not just we can change, it's like we are change, and our very nature is change. And you might even say that our very purpose in life is change. And this isn't optional. And this is like kind of, it's like it's our nature. It's what we're kind of long for. We might talk about it in different ways, but really, that's the Buddha. That's what the enlightened mind saw, that we're all different. All these lotuses, I think, really draws out something like this. See, it's wired in us to seek happiness, fulfillment, freedom from suffering. And the Buddha saw that is something that is really attained through growth. It'd be interesting, you can talk in your discussion groups, what do we mean by growth? Because that's quite a big question. We might say through developing our heart, developing our mind, developing qualities which are themselves happiness. That's what we're really looking for, to kind of develop and grow in such a way that our state of mind is happiness. Enlightenment being the complete fulfillment of that. It's not about, getting the right stuff, even though we try that, but really what we're looking for is something that can only be found within. So happiness comes from inside. That second big idea, if you remember from the intro course. And I was thinking, I think we'd do a lot better as a human race and as individuals if we made our decisions in reference to this somehow, to this kind of sense of, is this going to help beings to grow? Is it going to help me to grow? Is it going to help others to grow and flourish, to discover who they really are, to be fully and deeply themselves even? You can imagine if all our world leaders, whenever they were making a big decision, they stopped and asked, is this going to help lotuses to grow? That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Is it going to help lotuses to flourish? So as we heard in the story, the Brahma Sahampati story, it tells us that the Buddha at first doubted his ability to teach, which makes for a good story, but is that actually true? Is that actually true? Would the Buddha really have doubted that he could teach or would want to teach? He said it would be troublesome and wearying if he tried, could the Buddha really get troubled and weary? It's hard to imagine, really. According to Sangha, the decision to teach was actually inevitable. There was no question, really. The story is more like a drama that's kind of playing out this kind of, or playing out and teaching us something of significance. But the decision to teach is part and parcel of enlightenment. And to the extent that we ourselves have a taste of that, to that same extent, we will want to share with others something of that, which again, it's not necessarily literally going to necessarily mean teaching Buddhism, but sort of, something of realizing kind of, sort of this kind of jewel, this kind of universal jewel that all human beings are seeking. So for an enlightened being, the distinction between self and other has gone, completely gone. And just to be clear, so you might hear this a lot, kind of, the distinction between self and other, going beyond self and other. It's quite subtle. It doesn't mean loss of individuality, and it doesn't mean everyone and everything becomes this one homogeneous blob, all is one man kind of thing. It more suggests a sort of, this kind of a beautiful, blissful state of infinite expansion of the heart and of our being. Infinite expansion of the self, even. You may sometimes get a glimmer of this when doing the Metabhavana practice. This kind of, this sense of everything, I'm bigger, everything's bigger. I'm all these people I'm bringing to mind, or can be such a strong sense of when, well-wishing, when that's there, it's almost as if they're us somehow, it's it doesn't quite, those distinctions don't quite work in the same way, but it's not literally that everyone becomes the same, or that you can't tell the difference between yourself and other people. The enlightened state brings about profound solidarity with all beings, all that lives, seeing that we're all deeply interrelated. Third big idea, third operational concept from the intro course. All beings, yes, solidarity with all beings. And by all beings, we really mean all beings, yeah. Not just all Buddhists, all people that might be up for it. Whether human or animal, friendly or unhelpful, whether we like them or we don't, left wing, right wing, whatever. It doesn't matter. The Buddha's kind of, his solidarity is with all beings because, in a sense, he's expanded to the point where all beings kind of are himself in a certain kind of way. So whatever our views and opinions, all of life is sacred, worthy of love and even reverence. And the Buddha felt this like times a million to infinity and beyond. But he didn't just feel compassion, feel like metta and love. He didn't just feel it, it's like he became it. This is how I kind of imagine anyway. It's like he became compassion. That kind of expansion of his being, that complete kind of breaking down of the boundaries between self and other. It's not just feeling, it's not just having like a kind of an experience of compassion. It's like almost as if he became it. It's almost as if I'm getting to quite poetic territory here, but poetic doesn't mean not true. It actually usually means more true, but not literally. It's not literal truth, but it's more true than what we normally say. But it's almost as if the barriers between his consciousness and what we could call a sort of universal consciousness, those barriers are gone. He became metta. He became reality even. And metta is the sort of the way reality expresses itself and is even. Metta is reality, we might say. You could even say the universe is made of love, but we're maybe straying a bit, I don't know, straying into a bit kind of very, very, very poetic territory. But nonetheless, I do think, for me, it feels like the great significance of this. I feel like it's something really means a lot to me anyway, this sense of actually the universe is inherently kind of waiting for us to, to enter into this river of loving kindness, which is kind of there all the time and just waiting for us. So the Brahma Sahampati story, it's a kind of mythic way of expressing something about the Buddha's decision to try and pass on enlightenment to others. The essence of freedom and freedom from suffering and complete fulfillment. And you could say that Brahma Sahampati represents an aspect of the Buddha's mind, if we get a bit more psychological, which might make us feel a bit more comfortable, perhaps. An aspect of his mind, the part of him that always knew it was never going to be the case that he wouldn't teach. It's like his decision to go forth right from the start. It wasn't just because he was miserable and he wanted to be happy. He wanted to discover like the true nature of existence. He wanted like the sense of this is for everyone, and he's paving the way to open the doors of the deathless so that others might follow as well. It was of a kind of much bigger significance than just his own sort of preference to want to sort of live as a truth seeker. And if we practice the Dharma seriously, we can't help but be taken beyond ourselves. Whatever our motivations may start as, if we really take practice seriously, if we take meditation seriously, if we take our ethics seriously, it will start to crack us open, which is amazing and terrifying in my experience. I find it incredible and scary. On my ordination retreat, when I was up in the Spanish mountains for about 16 weeks, about 2/3, 3/4 in, we were studying a text on the Bodhisattva ideal, which is a sort of way of looking at the Buddhist vision, particularly in terms of like the altruistic dimension. I remember walking with a friend and having this sort of kind of beautiful and scary realization that I've committed myself to something where I might end up in situations where I can't say no. And by that, I don't mean, we always have freedom of choice. I can say yes, I can say no to things, but more like there'll be situations where if I see, hang on a minute, there's a need here much greater than myself. How could I not respond? If I've I've really taken seriously that I'm trying to become sort of more open-hearted, less selfish, that will just be the response. And that's incredible and scary. I think my kind of more egoic part of me thinks that would be a loss of freedom, whereas really it's the other way around. That's, freedom is what I say, this expansion, this complete responsiveness and compassion to all beings. And I just want to say a little bit more about compassion at this point. It's a word that can often be misunderstood. Particularly, I want to say a bit about compassion in sort of the highest sense, which is a complete mystery, but nonetheless, I think we can draw something out from the Buddha story here, the story of the Buddha. Compassion in the highest sense, what the Buddha experiences as compassion, which is said to be, it's said that he trembled with compassion. The word that translates is anukampa in the story, when he kind of looks at the whole world with compassion. The word is anukampa, which means to tremble with. So it's almost this kind of resonance, trembling with the life in others. This really visceral, physical response. But compassion in the highest sense is infused with wisdom. So with a clear seeing of the true nature of happiness and suffering and where they come from, as expressed in this vision of the lotus pond, of lotuses growing upwards. He saw that the deepest and deepest and highest, mixed metaphors, need of human beings is actually this fulfillment and opening of the heart. That is the deepest and highest need. But the Buddha's compassion, he would help beings in whatever way they needed. So if they needed practical help, sometimes you could see that he would give it to them. So compassion, it responds in many, many different ways. If people need food and shelter, we can provide that, or medicine. But for many of us, and for all of us ultimately, if we really want to be truly fulfilled and happy, it's a spiritual vision that I think is really needed. Exemplifying a spiritual vision, a vision of meaning, of what we're all really here for, what we're really seeking, what we really, what our deepest longing of the heart is. I find this a bit of a tension for me. I feel like one of the reasons why I asked for ordination and wanted to become an order member was because I really believed something of this. I had this sense of, if we're not actually transforming our minds, we're just going to keep going round and round and round. Just changing the externals is amazing. By the externals, I mean sort of, all the system, all the technology or political systems. There's so many things in the world that can be celebrated that we've managed to build in this world, over the last 2 millennia or more than that, really. But if the greed and hatred and delusion in our hearts isn't transformed, it will express itself in some way that will lead to suffering and won't lead to fulfillment. But I find it's a bit of a tension, because although I believe that, at the same time, if I'm not careful, I can become a bit apathetic, sort of I don't need, kind of almost not really wanting to look at the world, I must admit, I do fall into that sometimes. But just to be clear, that's not the Buddhist vision. The Buddhist vision is of this solidarity with all that lives, in responding in whatever way is needed in any situation to whatever beings need. Yet at the same time, the Buddha's primary concern, we might say, was liberation. It was the cultivation of lotuses. Vedanta talks about the Dharma being a horticultural manual for the cultivation of lotuses, which I really love. I think the extent that we don't sort of, individually as in a human race, I would say that to the extent that we don't kind of embrace what kind of really matters to human beings, what our kind of deepest longing and needs are, to the extent we deny that, I think we can get ourselves in an awful lot of mess. I think all the kind of, sort of practical helping with world problems, whatever it might be, I think would work much better, again, if it was all in this context of, is this going to help lotuses to grow? So the Buddha makes this inevitable decision to try and help beings grow towards, we might say, the sunlight, to grow out of this pool of water of life towards the sunlight of complete freedom and liberation. And he wonders where to start. So this is coming to the end now. He wonders how he's going to start doing this. He returns to his feeling of gratitude. He remembers his two teachers, original teachers who taught him some very, kind of quite profound meditation practices. He feels gratitude for them. They really helped him. He thinks, yes, they're close. They're nearly there. They have very little dust in their eyes. I could help them. And then realizes kind of sort of telepathically, it seems, he just knows, oh no, they've passed away. Can't do that. So then he continues his mood of gratitude and remembers his 5 friends, 5 who did severe ascetic practices with him, if you remember from last week's talk, practicing kind of starving their bodies and doing awful things to their bodies, really. They really thought that was what would help them break through, and it didn't work at all. But the Buddha feels gratitude for them because they were his brothers and they helped him. They helped each other. They were friends. And sees, yes, they're nearly there. It won't take long. If I go and I teach them, they will understand. And then there'll be others. There'll be others who've realized the Dharma, and the Sangha can come into existence. So he set off to find them. And just to point out, this is in the story, this is like the first time he's actually taken a step. And we probably can't take that literally, but mythically, he's been sat there for 7 weeks. All this stuff's happening. And then step and moving out into the world to go and teach the Dharma, which will eventually, that first step has led to us being here over 2,500 years later. Which is a great, great thing. Thus ends the talk.